Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the fireside chat on blockchain and tokenization for everything. And I would like to welcome everyone who have joined us virtually. So when you talk about tokenization, the possibilities are immense and endless, starting from digital art to real estate to even bonds. So Bank for International Settlements and Hong Kong Monetary Authority also announced a project called Project Genesis, where they want to tokenize green bonds to improve future for sustainable investment. So at this point in time, let me bring in Navin. Navin, welcome to the discussion and share your thoughts on how do you think this tokenization journey moving forward? So NFTs, they have kind of put the entire discussion on tokenization to mainstream, and even Bollywood celebrities and cricket stars, they are jumping into this story. So how do you see this playing out, and what are some of the other use cases as far as India is concerned where you see adoption happening?
Thank you, Sharat. I think very interesting topic. It looks like the blockchain, crypto, NFT, the time has come. I think it's 3 days and it's like fourth session, starting from, I think, starting a conference on the crypto, then moving to some sort of a CBDC discussion, quite a evolved one on that one. Then again, some discussion on crypto, and now back to NFT tokenization. So I think these are interesting times. First, let's understand what this technology can do in a certain space, right? Especially where the tokenization or NFTs are concerned. We have a UIDI solutions which we all use, right, as ID for us. And on the different contexts, there is additional ID work that is happening at the global level. That can you have a global identities? So the way we have identities, humans, there are a lot of objects which needs to have a unique identities. Right? They could be used in a day-to-day basis, which could be just like your documents, like your identity documents. It could be your driving licenses. It could be any unique product that is actually given a special identity. Let's say your registration for a property. So anything which has a unique identity, and that identity is valuable. And if that identity has to be maintained throughout the life cycle of that particular product or a brand or whatever you call it, if you have to objectify something, authenticate, and identify it with something unique, I think that's where the blockchain combination and simplification, which is done by NFT. So I would put it this way, that if blockchain is like a OS, like Windows and Androids, I think NFT is something like an app on that OS to simplify the use of it. So use cases like NFT are kind of, while it's at a bit of early stage and a hype cycle, but they are actually simplifying. They are putting the imaginations and the use cases out in different people's mind, that how it can change the world. So I would say that the world in future is going to be wherever there are issues, that how do you identify anything unique, and are you sure that it is what it is that is saying? The way Aadhaar says that who you are, can it be an object which actually it says that this is what it is, and it attaches ownership to it to a particular person? So I mean, the use cases could be immense. I gave you some example, right, from property to artwork to a music. Now the question is, how do you create and evolve the models? And which is what is happening, that while it has certain limited use cases, if it is just attached to a unique identification and a ownership of it, how can it also become a interesting use case and a business model? So for an example, the music industry or artists are looking at that, how can they participate in the entire royalty framework? So every transaction that happens in the future, it's not just about now limited to the identity. It's not limited to, let's say, identification of the owners and authenticity of the object. It is also now about how do you participate in the commercial transaction or a commercial reward of the chain. So these are unique opportunities which today, if you have to do it using any other technology, one, they're not robust enough. Secondly, not reliable enough. Thirdly, I mean, immensely complex, and you're not sure even after that they are accurate. So this is a huge opportunity for the entire ecosystem, not within the fintech, but probably across various use cases, to figure out where all you could apply this, where all you could use it. We should take some of the big successes that are being touted, even the celebrities, just as an attention, and bringing those people's attention to it, and then say, hey, this is possible. And also a little bit of endorsement, right, that this works.
Right. So Navin, since you talked about real estate, I would like to get your views on what you think about the challenges of tokenization with respect to real estate, and especially fractional ownership. Is it doable in the current legal landscape, or do we need some changes to the law? What can stop us or what can actually enable us?
So my understanding as far as real estate is concerned, I think there are multiple models where the same property is already owned. I mean, and we all are living in India where the joint family concept and the Hindu undivided family and all those concepts exist. So I think the law allows you to own real estate in a kind of, let's say, multi-party scenarios. Now, can you make it simplify? Can you make the identification of parties easier? Yeah, that scope is there. So it's more about efficiency. I don't think the regulatory framework should be a challenge. Well, I'm not a legal expert, but my understanding is real estate should be easier part. Of course, the government side, they have to figure out the platform and how do you ascertain and what all you allowed to use, what all they want to centralize. Because again, everything that the government does currently is based on a concept called centralized data and a centralized power. The moment you have to adapt it as is the way it is, all that information actually goes in a public hand, which in a way is right, because then nobody can deny. I mean, at one place, data or a data error happening cannot create a problem for all the owners. So it's a decision, and a big decision for the governments and the appropriate authorities to take. As far as fractional ownership and equity is concerned, I think that's where probably when you were saying fractional ownership, that's usually used in a more equity context. That is something currently allowed in a markets like US, and I personally am fascinated by that concept, and that works. And let's say you have MRF share, which is like in the thousands, and if somebody can't buy the full share, and if it is doing well, if it is a good company, why shouldn't you allow somebody to just own, let's say, 1/10 or a 1/5 or even 1/30th of it? I mean, you should, right? So I think that's where the legal framework currently, for certain reason, doesn't allow. Also, our original architecture of Companies Act, the way it works is it works on number of shareholders, it works on number of, let's say, a lot of regulations are around minority, and it all is number. Now, I think we need to look at all those frameworks very differently and to bring in the number and a value in a right context. That what works better is just the number, it's just the, let's say 200, and then if you go beyond 200, in a simple example, and if you do a private deal, it becomes actually a public deal. It becomes like IPO, right? So these are the concepts that probably on the equity side or any other asset trading side, we've still not been very clear in the current regulatory regime how we do it. Is it not possible? I think it is, because the good part is even SEBI clearly endorses anything that is happening in this tech space. I don't think there are any challenges in their mind or any confusion in their mind that this technology doesn't work or this technology has any problem. Their challenge is more around the crypto trading part, which has its own, let's say, a different subject to talk about. But other than that, conceptually, they all agree that there are benefits available, and they can be taken by the system with its commodity, with its security, or any other kind of trading. So I think there we may need to look at some policy intervention, and probably, hopefully, we'll see some changes soon.
Right. So SEBI also, I guess last month they came out with some press release stating that depositories need to use blockchain for creation of securities and even monitoring of those securities, right? So do you see this as a way forward for, let's say, tokenization of securities or tokenization of shares? Is SEBI moving in that direction? Is it safe to say?
I would put it this way, that India has been one of the most successful and very early company which introduced concept of scriptless trading. And it's not very new, by the way, just about a couple of decades old. And we were way ahead, and we have done it successfully. So in a way, you already virtualized. Now you want to call it tokenized. Yeah, I mean, this is like one more level ahead, right? That you can actually identify them uniquely anytime, and you could also associate with any owner without getting into details. Currently, they're already the unique identification for the company in terms of ISIN numbers, in terms of, let's say, equity share certificates, and the specific shares numbers already exist, the unique numbers, right? They're already in digital form in depositories. So if you look at what was missing was a available audit trail, which happens in a traditional way today. So if you put it on a blockchain, obviously, the chances of error or a reconciliation of those securities obviously goes away, right? So it becomes like a foolproof way of doing it. So I'm not actually surprised, because that was a no-brainer for them. They're already doing it. They just need to make sure it gets even, let's say, a lot more robust and a lot more efficient. So this will surely kind of be done. And as I said, because of these things, as they get implemented, then concepts like fractional share ownership, the division or one part, or just the value becomes important, not the numbers and how much you've invested. And actually, common man, if you want to come and start investing, that is very important. If somebody wants to buy a Reliance Industry, and if they can't afford a full share, but they just want to buy, let's say, 100 rupee worth every month, why shouldn't we allow it, right? This is what has grown the crypto industry. And if you see the numbers, I mean, we were just discussing in another conference that the number of investors in India in the crypto are already closer to like 1.5 crore or 15 million. In the entire retail history of a stock market, the retail investors are close to 20 million or 2 crore. Now, again, this could be the key, what you talked about, the fractional, that here, because the youngsters are allowed to invest the value they want, but there you have to go in the unit of one. So if they like probably certain shares, but it's too expensive for them to actually go and even buy one share. So I think some of these concepts, if they start coming in, it will again bring in the more inclusiveness, even in a securities market.
Thanks, Navin. Since we are talking about tokenization, so tokens and especially security token offerings, right? So STOs are being hailed as, let's say, another evolution in fundraising. So do you think the current VC or the current IPO model stands disrupted or has a chance of disruption by this STO model?
Actually, I personally believe it becomes more efficient. The key issue is that how do you regulate ICOs? What do you call them? Do you call them? You can't call them. So one of the challenges, while we saw the news and we don't yet know the authenticity of it, that there's a consideration to look at crypto assets as a commodities. Now, while for trading, it may work perfectly well, but the moment you come to concept of ICOs, you don't issue commodities, right? They are mined. So other than one particular product, which is Bitcoin, which is actually mined, everything else is issued as a token and it's a utility based. So actually there is a conflict. They fit in more in a securities framework and they need to actually pass the litmus test. So interestingly, again, as I said, even in the securities market, the SEBI has well-laid rules that who can issue securities in what form. If they allow the way you could issue equity shares, if they say it includes tokens, right, which could be in a form like equity characteristics or debt characteristics or a hybrid or a convertible. I mean, technically, there's no difference ultimately, right? It's just the coupon that you're getting, whether you're getting in a blockchain form, whether you're getting in a digital form. Conceptually, it remains same. The process has to be same. Ideally, the process curtails because it becomes a lot more faster. Even if you see now that the way IPO happens, it is a lot more digital, right? You just go to your bank account, identify the one you just want the money that you want to invest, is done. And if you're allotted, it just comes and sits in your demat. So if you see, the process is no different. Probably that could be further crunch and it can become even, let's say, a lot more real time. The ICOs is open for next 4 hours. Whoever send money, first come, first serve basis. I mean, even that process of allocation becomes so transparent in real time, which today has its own nuances and which is what is curtailing down anyway. So in a way, if we use the technology even in the IPO market as is even with the securities, I mean, there's no difference. You can still call them equity, but you can still use the technology to make it more efficient. So sometimes the nomenclature becomes a problem. It's a classic case study probably that the whole problem across the globe for crypto is actually because you call it cryptocurrency. And the moment you call it currency can be issued only by the government or a regulator or a central bank. So you actually came in a conflict of the entire world's regulatory arm. Now, if you would have called it asset or a security or something else, you would have probably sailed through a lot easier. And name that has got fixed with it. So you're still struggling with it.
Thank you. So do you think that we also need certain minimum disclosure requirements, or let's say some redressal mechanism or grievance redressal mechanism for, let's say, especially token issuances, those who are backed by security? Do you think we have that framework already, or we need a new approach to that?
See, I would say that you need a framework for sure, right? Now, what framework would it be? I think that could be under discussions and debate, because let's also understand that we have been extremely successful when it comes to allowing listing for a scaled up entities and a growth and post-growth stage. We've still not been able to figure out, despite a very high energized, let's say, startup ecosystem, including a lot of attempts by multiple exchanges. They've been, like, I would say, moderately successful, not very successful, if not the failures, on when it comes to startup equity listing or trading. Now, if you really marry these concepts to those startups, and interestingly now, India has a large number of ecosystem of a startup, including fintechs, which is over 3,000 already, and it's rapidly increasing. If you marry those technologies and these communities, and if you kind of create something which works for them, and make sure, I would always say that the risk appetite of every individual is very different. I mean, there is a general understanding that, which probably certain institutional framework is still working with, that the risk appetite in India is low. I don't think so. I would say it differs highly from a person to person. I mean, there are people who are willing to take chances. If that was the case, you wouldn't see so many investors going after crypto, which is still, there's a multiple gray area. There are all kinds of issues. So I would say that what people want is a transparency, clarity, and an opportunity and a decision-making ability at their end. Now, in that process, if there are people who are hiding truth from you or misleading you or let's say misrepresenting something, that definitely has to be curtailed. That is an interest of all those industries, right? Or let's say the whole ecosystem.
Thanks. I mean, so I have just a couple of minutes left. So what would be your closing remarks for this session, and what is the way forward? What do you think how tokenization can be done in a better way?
To be honest, this is one application which has less complexities on the regulatory side. And this is something which could be universally applied in a lot of use cases. That's why I said very simply and generically that any object that has an identity and which needs to attest to a ownership and which has a continued use, you could apply it. I mean, if you take these 3 parameters and you find so many use cases that you could develop, and that should give a food for thought for a lot of youngsters and entrepreneurs to come up with a lot many use cases.
Thank you. Thanks, Navin, for your wonderful insights. Thank you, everyone.
My pleasure. Thank you, Sharat. Thanks for inviting me.